Hello, Left Reckoning patrons. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
What's up, brother?
Not a whole lot. And joining us once again is our buddy Emma Vigeland. Emma from, of course, the Majority Report and the Emma Sports Vigeland Network. Emma, thanks once again for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys for having me on. Thanks Matt just can't get enough of me. Like I see him at work, hanging out after. It's all good.
Exactly. It's true. And, I just wanted to continue what we do in private, which is celebrate an increasingly dangerous society and one that menaces people as they try to go use public transportation, which is what we as leftists like to see.
Recently, I'm a known crime lover. I love
exactly crime. Who just applauds and accepts it and says we love all this. So recently, Emma, you mainly, and me in the sense of like affirming you off camera, were featured on Ben Shapiro's show.
Yeah.
For discussing the killing of Jordan Neely by Daniel Penny, which is working its way through Brooklyn courts as we speak. And Shapiro characterized it in a way that I think is about as first of all, I just want to say I don't think there's a real argument here. I think there is a opportunistic attempt to monopolize a concern that they don't actually really speak to, which is like what happens when people are acting out in public. Like, what is the actual problem here? But let's just play Ben Shapiro's clip here, and we can respond to it.
This is what is being normalized. And again, it makes you a good person to accept it. So, for example, there's a woman named Emma Vigeland. She's on the Majority Report, I guess. And she had a clip going viral today talking about how if you want to feel safe on public transit, this is bourgeois. And you have to suppress those bourgeois feelings. You have to make yourself feel okay about being abused on the public transportation system.
I was hit at one point sitting on the subway by a man who was having a mental health episode. He sat next to me and he was elbowing and kind of flailing around and hit me in the face and in my body. And it was jarring, right? The idea that I would want him to be hurt in any way, I just didn't want to be near him in that moment because I understood something was going on here. But like my fear is not the primary object of like what we should be focusing on right now. It's the fact that this person is in pain. And so like the politics of dehumanization privileges the bourgeois kind of concern of people's like immediate discomfort in this narrow.
Now I'm going to pause there because Emma's not comfortable with that. She used the word bourgeois there. And I honestly think it is exactly right. I think, and David's more of a theoretical Marxist, so, you can adjudicate this, David. But like, to me, if you looked at what happened there and you immediately sympathize with, oh, what if I was the guy who choked the man to death? And you have completely skipped the situation of, oh, what if I was in that situation of extreme deprivation to the point of being like saying things like what Penny again started off saying is, I don't have any food. And then said what everyone's taking as, okay, you can use violence on this guy. I don't care if I get arrested. Mm-hmm. And like that, you have skipped over that and said, no, actually the real problem is all the fear around it. Emma, your fear is the real problem there. That is like, it's only people who are insulated as a class from that type of deprivation. But I'm curious what you think, David.
No, I'm curious too what David has to say. I guess get uncomfortable looking at myself on camera, so that might be part of it. But or hearing myself, especially in the sped up way. But I guess I don't have that theoretical background, so sometimes I guess I get uncomfortable when I use it in a colloquial manner, and it might not be completely connected fully to what the theoretical like kind of lens would dictate. But I guess David, you can fill me in.
I mean, don't put me on the spot, but like, I mean, I think that there, it's right to like recognize that, more than anything, it's like that everything is interpreted solely like through your own prism, in the sense that like I'm having a bad time on the subway because somebody else is having a crisis, right? And it needs to stop because of that. And particularly when like, again, like we're not even talking about like in this context too, we're not even talking about like maybe that person being removed, maybe even potentially being like forcibly removed from the train, right? We're talking about somebody literally losing their life because of like the discomfort. I mean, like we all know, I mean, every single person on our side who talks about this, we's like, we've all had those public experiences. I'll say I've had those public experiences in New York. I've had them here. I've had, like Austin is a city too that has like a rampant homelessness, and and people, like, this is a different kind of context, but it's the same kind of mentality. Is like, so I remember when there was a lot of homelessness in the city. A lot of people have been coming to Austin forever, and obviously it's gotten worse as the housing crisis has gotten worse in the city. For a while, the enforcement of it was purposefully lax, right? Because we don't have places to put people. So, we're not going to round people up for camping by the side of the road. The right wing and the Republicans got together, and they put forward this ballot initiative that basically made camping, being out in public with a bag on your person, illegal in the city of Austin. Well, what comes out of that? The cops start showing up to these groups of people, and they start bulldozing over their homes, their settlements, and people started dying in the woods, by the lakes. People went from public places, right, where you could see the problems in our society, you could see the houselessness, to hidden places, and in those hidden places, which the conditions were even more dangerous, which is hard to imagine, but yes, more dangerous than being on like the side of the road like they were here, right? And it goes, and like what it was about, though, like what that fight was about, and we could maybe talk a little bit later about, like, I do think that like the left has a hard time talking about crime, also a hard time talking about some of these things, but I want to get into that later. What we're saying here is that, like, what that initiative here was that people didn't want to do anything about the houselessness. They didn't want to do anything about the mental health crisis. They just didn't want to have to see it in front of them anymore, because it was visceral and it should upset you, right? I think that, like, it's also wrong to be oblivious to it, right? It was upsetting for me when I was driving around town and seeing the difficult state that so many other people were living in, and I wanted to see that end by like housing and all the things that we fight for. And what ended up happening was this very personal individualist mentality that, like, I just don't want to see it again, out of sight, out of mind mentality won out. And it has had massive consequences in terms of human life for people.
Yeah, I mean,
and some or go ahead, Emma.
No, I mean, I guess that's very similar to my outlook, and what I was trying to articulate in the wake of the killing of Jordan Neely. It was super raw at that point too. Was that we exist in New York City. I take public transport, and these kinds of because we have such a threadbare social safety net in our society, where we don't guarantee housing and we don't have socialized healthcare. This is going to happen, especially in a city like New York, where we have decided that it's a bigger priority to make the city a playground for bridge and tunnelers and for people that want to come in and see a show and go to a Knicks game and then leave and not feel like they saw anything upsetting. It's Disney World, but for adults that have a lot of money and live outside the city. And that's partly driven by real estate developers, national restaurant associations, trade groups like that. And you see it throughout the country in cities that are most acutely hit by homeless epidemics, right? Like San Francisco is a great example of this. We had an author on the Majority Report who spoke about that, where like there's this shift in what's prioritized in urban centers. Is it livability, or is it the kind of theme park element where people can come in and consume and then leave? And in New York, I mean, look, I grew up in the suburbs of New York. That is the sentiment here. That's 100% it. And that was what drove kind of my reaction in that moment, which also Ben Shapiro cut out Matt's commentary, which I think is fascinating. Like, I mean, Matt, you can expand upon that, but I do think there's something about me saying it, a white woman that, like, in another life, maybe I could have worked at Fox News or something like that, right? I fit a certain archetype. And given, like, I guess, I don't know, certain social indicators, they thought that there's a lot of men who want to fantasize about white knighting in these kind of situations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And my story in that instance, which was very off the cuff, triggered something deep in that.
I found it very revealing, like that thing of, I don't think they really understood that they were mad at you, especially when like Zaid Jalani and they mentioned you went to private school or whatever, that it was, you have that background and don't want the homeless man killed, which is like to say like you are going against like basically that class. And I find that very fascinating.
Say, like, they really have no idea about my background. Like, my parents are both lawyers, right? And I'll just say an aside, but my mother grew up on food stamps and without electricity, did really well for herself. But the rest of my family is just like I have that, and they also, my parents didn't pay for my private school. Like I have that background, but I have a lot of different class dynamics in my family, which is very different from what's portrayed by people who just screenshot my private school or whatever.
But they're just upset at the symbol, what the symbol of you is doing. Yeah. And the thing is like, okay, so, and I think like basically that approach is, there's a provocative approach versus a concern addressing approach, which the concern addressed approach is the concern of bourgeois people, not the people who are like, I have mental health issues and deal with houselessness. But okay, let's deal with the concern thing for a second. There is too much violence in America. You compare it to OECD countries, we are like 5 times over that. Now, I'm somebody who has experience of being from North Dakota and talking to like my grandma and my parents and cousins, and they are so impressed that I live in the hellhole that is New York. And I must be doing barrel rolls. I must be taking cover like it's Gears of War. Like, because how am I surviving in this? And the truth is that, okay, yes, New York has a higher violent crime rate than North Dakota. It has a lower violent crime rate than South Dakota. And if you look at, and what I find so frustrating is like, yes, we do need to address this. We do not address this with vigilante chokings or cops, right? Like we have, like you said, alluded to earlier, Emma, a massive problem with social safety and reproduction in this country. And what we do reproduce well is damaged, broken people that occasionally act out, because it is true. Like it is exceedingly rare, and those stats are the relevant ones, which is like per 100,000, as people emphasize subway violence. But it is true, right? Like I've heard of slashings on subway stops near to me, and like that's definitely a problem. And guess what? It did get a little bit worse during the pandemic, because I mean, I remember to this day hearing a guy out of my window when we were talking about the stimulus package. The first one was $1,000, right?
Yeah.
And he was yelling because he wasn't going to get that because he wasn't in the system like that. And so like,
and that's the person that needs that
exactly
more than anybody,
right.
Obviously. Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not a surprise. Like Zaid posted this info that
he's
I think
a
is
moron,
actually,
just going to be honest.
I mean,
he's a total
look,
weirdo.
like,
he used to send me all these weird DMs and stuff, like, but not in a weird like sexual way, but just like yelling at me about political positions. And I'm like, I don't really want to engage.
Yeah, no, this is him like a decade ago. Arguing that we saved the Cato Institute from
that's so good, dude. I love that.
Save its purity from the Koch brothers, which I mean, are like, to me, it's like I try to remember that this guy's coming from a baseline level of naivety. And also it's funny to watch Zaid try to talk to Michael Tracy on the occasion of Trump winning in 2016, because even Zaid's like, this actually might say something about racism in America, and Michael Tracy's like, no, it's not, none of that. But anyway, Zaid posted this data, and like at first I'm like, I thought like maybe there might be something to wrangle with here, but he said last year Quinnipiac polled New Yorkers about how they feel on the subway. 43% feel somewhat or very unsafe. The highest percentage of people feeling very safe is in Manhattan, the richest part of NYC. Now, I'm not really sure why that is a surprise, but when you look actually at these numbers, it tells you that maybe there's some other things going on here, like the massive gap between Republican voters and Democrat voters, where Republicans, only 6% of those guys feel very safe versus 20% of Democrats. Right. Also, the gap between black and white, the very safe is roughly similar, but a lot more white people feel very unsafe. And then I found interesting
Did he exclude those Staten Island numbers? Is that what
he just didn't talk about it? All he did is just put this out there, and I think all the numbers like kind of prove our point, which is like, okay, like one, which isn't to deny that there is a rise level in unsafety, which is for the reasons that we've talked about, but also like if your data includes Staten Island, which does not have a subway stop, I guess they feel unsafe on the ferry. Like they feel that it's unsafe on the subway. like only 3% of those people feel very safe, which is like 37%, almost 4 in 10 of Staten Island residents, which shows that to me, this is extremely mediated phenomenon.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
And so we have this recent thing here, which is like,
and I just want to say, for people that don't know who live on Staten Island's like the place in New York City that votes red, and there's a lot of cops and firefighters that live on Staten Island. Not to stereotype, but it's also quite conservative. Yeah.
And so like there's this crime in NYC account, and I'm not going to play this, but it's like, sure, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. That's why everyone is pretending they didn't notice him in order to avoid drawing attention. This is a dude. Okay, his ass is hanging out, and he's got a crop sort of shirt on, but he is literally dancing. To me, this is all he's doing.
I know.
This is like when all of us say like we've experienced things on the subway where people have like, you know, made us feel like, okay, maybe there might be an occasion for bystander intervention here if this guy acts out a little bit too much. That is not one of those occasions. No. And that is just, this is made for, and I'll say this, like, as a person born in North Dakota, I remember the feeling of getting out on I've never been in a very diverse area before. And so you grow up in an area where your diversity is all mediated through, like, I think this media that is often very racist, and it leads you to have a certain expectation of fear and sort of that. And eventually you realize that just because that guy dresses in a certain way and is dancing and has like an afro, he's not going to attack you. And then then you actually drill down to it even more. It's like, it's not actually a race thing at all, which is what a lot of these people think. It's signs of want and deprivation is like when people might get to a point where they're like this. And that is what needs to be dealt with, not putting them in a chokehold once they've suffered from that to a certain point where they can't take it anymore.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the media's role in like, the media and like the political media, I think most importantly, obviously, as you can see that in like the difference between what party people tend to vote to, what their perception on crime is, you know, but it's really dangerous. Like, you know, like here, you know, Austin is like one of the most safe cities in Texas and one of the most safe cities in the South, right? I think El Paso, which is another city that you would maybe assume is where, like, El Paso is also like a relatively safe city, right? But those are the cities that are like, you know, you would hear somebody maybe talk about on talk radio is like, this is, you know, Democrat hellhole, super dangerous. And it's one of those things where it's like you say things enough and then people start looking for patterns. And I don't want to speculate too much because I'm not like a detective or anything like that. But recently here, there were a few bodies found in Lake Travis. I'm sorry, not Lake Travis, in Town Lake, right? Which is, you know, in the middle of the city. And there was all this speculation, because Austin has defunded the police, which is a whole thing. They didn't. You know, now there's a serial killer on the loose because there was a typical profile, young men in their 30s, right? And everyone went, oh man, there must be a serial killer because the cops can't stop them. Well, and I don't want to make light of it because this is a tragedy in its own way, but well, they were young men in their 30s and they were all found by the place where people go and get really drunk, and there were no rails or guards to the lake, and it's you know, and there's no lighting, and you know, you know, more likely than not, and you know, that people got too drunk and they fell into the water and they drowned, right? And again, like, I don't want to speculate too much, you know, just because, you know, maybe there is something, but like the fact that like the immediate reaction, instead of looking at like what is a likely scenario in one of the safest cities in the country, that maybe we maybe shouldn't have like a party district right by the water, and if we do, maybe we should have some protection so that people don't walk in and drown. There's a serial killer, you know, getting folks. And like that comes when there's this narrative that's constantly bombarding you that like life is getting more and more dangerous, which happens when like most of the local media is controlled by major corporations that love to play up these kind of crimes, out of control narratives. You know, and it creates this really dangerous thing, because on top of it, you have people who are feeling unsafe. And then you have this propensity to want to enact violence, because like, I'm not justifying, for example, like the killing of Neely, but like there was a shooting in Bastrop, right, recently, where like a cheerleader got off the bus and she walked into the wrong car thinking it was an Uber, and the guy pulled out his gun and he shot her. Horrible thing. And obviously like that should be the focus, but also like this is a product of this guy is wandering around town sitting in his car thinking that like a young 17-year-old 18-year-old woman is about to murder him. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of mentality that like so many people are living their lives in America right now where they think they're one moment away from potentially losing their life, right? That is a sickness that has been created in this country. And like with this attack, you know, with what happened, the killing on the subway, it's the same kind of thing that, right? It's completely ludicrous, but this is also a product of like pumping this idea into people's heads that like the subways are inherently dangerous. Like there's going to be an attack on you. So there are people who are just like up there and their adrenaline's pumping the whole time they're on the subway. It's a, you know, it's a dangerous formula.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up a serial killer narrative because I really see what we're experiencing where whether it's like Matt's relatives in North Dakota or people not honestly my relatives, but people that I know in the suburbs of New York City, in New Jersey, or in Long Island or whatever, where there is this like titillation element of of crime in the cities and look how dangerous it is outside of my like little fiefdom or in these like big Democrat controlled cities where there's a lot of people that I might not see on a regular basis. They are black or they're homeless or they're poor or whatever it is. It's like almost an extension of the moral panics of the 80s and 90s, but it's just updated for social media. It's true crime listening moms. It's New
That's
York
crazy
Post
to me.
reading dads. I mean, I never got the true crime appeal, and I think I'm starting to understand why.
It's a little bit troubling to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's people that are titillated by it in a certain way, or like it makes them feel safer to feel like there's other things happening in the world that are more harmful. And there's a racial element that Matt touched on too, that like that account Crime in NYC where the guy's just dancing. What mental leaps do you make to think that that's a criminal act? Except for the fact that he's a black guy and his pants are a little low. Like, or what are we, Bill Cosby at this point? I mean, give me a break. Like, so I think there's something that that's tapping into that is very real, and it's old. It's not something particularly new.
Yeah, and I just find it very revealing how certain libertarian folks come out of the woodwork to defend like a pro cop and pro vigilante agenda is just wild to me. Like, or it's not wild. I actually think I understand it fairly well, but on the surface of it, I think it should be wild to people. Because like clearly, like the idea that we're the ones who are accepting of people in that situation and not them, and not like what is not accepting it, letting people choke people out, like no, like we should be moving heaven and earth, and all you hear from like the pro the pro penny folks is like they should be forced into mental health care, and it's like, can we at least try the thing where we offer and remove the price discrimination for mental health care first before we tell cops to put people in straitjackets? Like the idea that
we're
we
doing
skip that
now in New York, Matt. Like it's the involuntary thing. I mean, and that narrative is so to what I think was touching on earlier, that is so like intoxicating for people because it feels like a simple solution, and it's also like it doesn't feel as condescending as what we're talking about. Where like there's a lot of communities that are way more on the front line of crime than I am, that don't look like me, that are black or they're Latino or whatever, where like they want solutions to experiencing the acute effects of a society that has no social safety net, and that makes total sense. And so I can understand why like this feels a little touchy-feely, but it's a big picture perspective on how to decrease crime and decrease harm. It's a harm reduction one. That's like what's harder to sell. That's why the left can struggle with the narrative, because it's so complex and so big picture that it's difficult to like have this is the 2 + 2 = 4 solution for what people are experiencing on a day-to-day basis in many cases.
Well, Chicago's an interesting counter narrative, obviously, with the election of Brandon Johnson there. Where like,
Yes.
that was somebody who was, abused for, for saying things like, that these things come from social conditions, and like, having some protections and help for people will do a lot to reduce crime. We'll have to see how that goes politically, because obviously that's going to be an uphill fight in the city. But like, it does show that like, the hesitation about like sort of being upfront about that is wrong, right? That like sometimes like progressive politicians can be scared to do it. I will say that like I think generally most leftists I think are pretty well equipped to make the general argument about like here are our solutions for crime, but almost always it's defensive, right? And what I mean by that is like it's when you get accused of not caring, then because I agree, like it's correct that like if we want to deal with crime, we have to deal with poverty, we have to deal with deprivation, we have to deal with mental health things. That means like significant spending from the state and society to take care of people. So it is a complex issue, but the fact that like we only make that case in the kind of defensive way, I think is really harmful. Because I'll just say this, and like will make some people mad, but like a lot of people on the left have a hard time like ever being able to talk about crime, and I think that's a weakness, right? I remember Jacobin put out issue a couple years back called Lower the Crime Rate, right? And people people should read the issue, it's great. Benjamin Fogel wrote an incredible piece on crime, not just in America, but in South Africa and in Brazil, talking about some of the solutions and things that we can do I guess the thing that we all say that we want to do. But the idea that like a left-wing publication was even spending some time talking about this was like going over the line. And I think that that's really bad, because if you let the right own the idea that like they're the only people who are concerned with crime, that's really harmful, because they do that all the time. I mean, I was at City Hall recently for a really contentious vote on police funding. I won't get into all of it, but all of the right-wing Republican operatives there, all they did was they talked like intersectionalists, right? Up until they basically were like, we need more cops, right? But what they said is like, oh, it's the black people in Austin who are suffering under crime. It's the Hispanic people, right? They're talking about these things. And it's like, obviously there's weaponizing and being cynical about it. But like the fact that they can even start to own those things, I think is an issue on our end. And I think we have to be able to, because it's not just crime. I think there's a lot of things with the left. It's like whenever the right makes a narrative about these things, we sort of coded it in our head that like ever being able to talk about this is necessarily like, oh, you're falling to the right. And yes, it's true that historically, when Democrats start talking about crime, what do they mean? They're about to try to tail the Republican Party and push harsh drug sentences, more cops, and all those kind of things. So I also understand like the hesitation that people get. But like, look, it's undeniable that like crime victims in this country are predominantly poor working class people, and we should see crime and the violence that a lot of people are subjected to in this country as a part of class war, right? That there are purposeful parts of town where people are going to you can get abused, you can get beat up, you can get robbed, and nobody's going to care. So like we have to be able to like, yes, make our progressive pitch for what we want to do about it, which I think is the correct one, but also be able to own it, that like we do want to see, for example, like crime go down significantly in this country. Like that's a pitch for wanting to live in a socialist or social democratic society, that these kind of crimes of desperation, this violence that people experience is like a symptom of the system that we're in, and we want to see that eradicated. And again, I know I've rambled too long, but it's just like this general like defensive posture that I find a lot of leftists and like progressives fall into, that I think hurts us in making our case.
Yeah, and I think like Stanley Nelson has a documentary about the was it mass incarceration, but in the 90s, right? Like, and the buy-in from Black communities for more policing as like a difficult thing. And
you cut out Matt. Who was the documentarian?
Stanley Nelson.
Stanley Nelson. Okay.
Yeah, and I think Michael Harriot I've seen make these points, which is like I think that the attitude's different now, which is like the Black community in this specific case is that yes, very concerned with crime and that sort of thing, but doesn't necessarily trust the cops as the solution this time for I think obvious reasons, right? And I think that's the challenge here. And I've seen Zaid been taken to task for implying that the basically 90s, which that is a threat, because I think like what David's saying, like this is an actual concern, because you look at these numbers. I mean, man, the Mississippi River Delta is fucking disgusting when it comes to violent crime. Too many people dying, and it's crazy. And it's like, we're pushing Columbia, right? Like, and that shouldn't be happening. But I think like we have to have a little bit more confidence in being able to propose these solutions, as opposed to just shutting down the conversation and assuming it's going to lead to more cops.
I agree. I think though, like the whole class stratification element too just brings us back to maybe, why there was that bizarre focus on my commentary on it, is that like, and Matt, we have talked about this off air, I guess, or on air, I can't even remember, but like they can't call me a class traitor, so they have to go to these kinds of other ad hominems, I guess, to deflect from it, because
the hard left is what Ben Shapiro called you, which congratulations.
So, I'm so excited. I mean, I've graduated from Elizabeth Warren shill to like essentially a communist. It's just although my politics certainly have changed since that, so I'll take that as a badge of honor. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is like this implicit kind of just understanding that we're all against the undesirables here, right? We all want them to be not seen and not heard. And let's kind of be quiet about that, because generally we're going to agree on like larger things about how our social spaces should be constructed. And like, if we're unrelenting about that on the left, then it makes it more difficult for them, because like, not to make this a media critique, but it's always going to be slanted in favor of insanity when it comes to crime, or more bullishness.
Suburban shut-ins.
Exactly. Because if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, that's that's not just the story of local news or national news or Fox News. It's now going to be a part of our viral news consumption online, and it's like that's what Libs of TikTok is too, to a different degree. It's just like, how can we get these very localized scandalous stories and make them into larger narratives about, say, a trans agenda or something like that.
Libs of TikTok is a prominent like sort of example of a much larger trend of those sorts of things, of like basically scaring people about X sort of targeted group that can only really be afraid of in contact with that group through something like TikTok. It's really alarming stuff. But Emma, thanks so much for joining us to celebrate the degradation of society and collapse into mayhem. What would you like to plug?
Oh, I thought we were going for like an hour. I mean, I didn't realize, but I'm down. Like ESVN, youtube.com/ESVN show. It's a sports show where I shoot the shit with Bradley, who we also work with. It's pretty fun. And then, of course, tune into the Majority Report, especially Thursdays when I host by myself. Get those numbers up, juice it up. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Only watch on Thursdays and don't watch any of the other days. So you can try to... It'd be very funny.
Create a trend,
if that day became way more popular than all the other days.
I mean, I'll look at the numbers briefly. We're not there yet, but I gotta like get Bradley to get more creative with the titles on my days, because then maybe we can make it like salacious or something like that.
We need to call in some favors and stuff too.
Exactly.
We need to set the table for the coup. You can't just do a coup.
I know.
You need to like prepare people for it first. So
right. I mean, I need to enlist you. That's goal number 1. So.
Emma, thanks so much. Patrons, we'll be back on Tuesday with our live show. So see you, folks. Peace. Thank you, Emma.